Let me ask you a question. If your family came from Ireland, would anybody be offended if you celebrated Irish heritage? If your family came from Mexico, would anyone be confused if you celebrated Mexican Independence Day? If your family came from the Dominican Republic or Haiti, Jamaica, Cuba, India, or any other nation represented in the American melting pot, would anyone question your right to celebrate your history, your culture, and the journey of your people? Probably not. America has always celebrated the stories of people who came from somewhere else and helped build something here. Nobody finds it strange when people celebrate the history of their ancestors. So, why does Juneteenth sometimes make people uncomfortable? Perhaps because many Americans were never taught what it actually represents. Before we go any further, let's clear up one of the biggest misconceptions about Juneteenth. Juneteenth is not the day every black person in America became free. That's not what the holiday commemorates. In fact, there were black Americans who had been free for decades before Juneteenth. There were free black communities throughout the North, and there were black Americans who had never been enslaved at all. So when people say Juneteenth was really a Texas thing, there's actually some truth to that. The event itself happened in Texas. On June 19th, 1865, Union troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, and announced that enslaved people there were free. For many enslaved Texans, this was the first time freedom had been officially enforced and publicly communicated. Think about that. The Emancipation Proclamation had been issued more than 2 years earlier. Freedom had been declared, but many people in Texas, freedom had not yet been delivered. See, there is a difference between freedom being written on paper and freedom becoming a reality. That's why Juneteenth became so significant. It began as a Texas remembrance, but as black Texans moved throughout the country, they carried the tradition with them. Over time, what started as a local commemoration became a broader celebration of emancipation, freedom, and the expansion of the American promise. In many ways, Juneteenth is not simply about what happened in Texas, it's about what Texas came to symbolize. The moment when freedom finally reached people who had waited far too long to hear the words, "You are free." And if we're honest, that's a story every American should be able to understand. Because American history has always been about expanding freedom to more people than before. Juneteenth is not about division, it's not about guilt, it's not about making one group responsible for the actions of another. Juneteenth is about freedom. And if there is one thing Americans claim to value above all else, it's freedom. For Black Americans, Juneteenth became a celebration of freedom delayed, but not denied. And if we're honest, it deserves a place in the American story. Because whether people want to acknowledge it or not, Black Americans are not a footnote in American history. They are one of the authors. The roads, the railroads, the ports, the farms, the industries, the labor, the infrastructure that helped transform a young nation into a global power was built in no small part by the hands of enslaved Africans and their descendants. That is not a political opinion. That is historical fact. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the story of Black America. Just as you cannot tell the story of America without discussing Irish immigrants who helped build canals, Chinese immigrants who helped build railroads, Hispanic communities that shaped entire regions, Jewish entrepreneurs who transformed commerce, or countless others who contributed to the American experiment. Every group has a chapter. Juneteenth simply recognizes one of them. And perhaps that is why it matters, because mature nations do not erase history. They learn from it, they acknowledge it, and they grow from it. The celebration of Juneteenth does not diminish the 4th of July. In many ways, it completes it. The 4th of July celebrates the birth of freedom in America. Juneteenth celebrates the expansion of American freedom. One marks the promise, the other marks the fulfillment of that promise for millions who had been excluded from it. And this is something every American should be able to appreciate. Not because we all share the same ancestry, not because we all share the same politics, but because we share the same country. A country that has never been perfect, a country that has often fallen short of its ideals, but also a country that has repeatedly demonstrated the ability to move closer to those ideals. Juneteenth is a reminder of that journey. It reminds us that freedom is valuable because people have fought for it. It reminds us that progress is possible because people have sacrificed for it. And it reminds us that understanding history does not weaken a nation, it strengthens it. So, whether Juneteenth is part of your personal story or not, take a moment to understand why it matters to millions of your fellow Americans. Because when one group celebrates freedom, it should never be viewed as a threat. In America, freedom is supposed to belong to all of us, and that is worth celebrating.